Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me in today's class. We are going to continue our lesson on parts of speech. And in today's class, we are going to consider one of the most important parts of speech, which is verb. Now, many of us are familiar with verbs, and many people describe verbs as action or doing words. And that is very true. But that can be complete. In today's class, I'm going to give you a more detailed description of what a verb is, and we're going to look at how a verb can be used in a sentence. Verbs are very, very important, as we all know. That is because if you don't have a verb in your sentence, you're not likely going to make sense. So the verbs are very important, very essential for construction of sentences. Without verbs, our sentences will be meaningless. And we describe verbs commonly as action or doing words, but there are some verbs that don't indicate action or activity. So we're going to look at a more comprehensive description or definition of verbs in our class today. So we can define a verb as an action or a doing word or a word that indicates a state of being or possession or a condition. So that verb that describes your condition or your state of being, and it could also indicate action, that is a verb. Now, on the board, I have examples of sentences with verbs. Here, this is the verb am, and it says, I am a teacher. In this sentence, in this example, I don't have to do any activity. I'm not performing any action. So, this cannot be an action word because it is not indicating any action. It's not showing that I'm doing anything. I don't have to perform any action to be a teacher. It is simply my condition or my state of being. Here, the man worked very hard. Good. Work indicates action, activity. When you perform a task, you're working or you work. So here, the verb work is indicating action. So we can describe this as an action word. The children are playing. Ah, it's not indicating any action per se. Play can be an action, but this verb are is not indicating action. Instead, this one are is supporting this verb play. So the verb are is supporting the verb play, more like assisting the verb. I can swim. Swimming as an action or a verb will indicate action, but can is only stating my possibility or my capacity. So can as a verb is not showing any action. Rather, it is supporting this verb, swim. So can swim, can is supporting swim. The boy broke the vase. Okay, broke here indicates action, the action of breaking. So the boy broke the vase. So broke here is an action verb. He knows the answer. He knows the answer. This is more like um, expressing ability or feeling or condition. So he knows the answer. Doesn't have to do any action. There's no activity here. So knows can be an action word here or a doing word, but it's a verb. So, in essence, not all verbs indicate action. Some verbs can just state your condition or your state of being, or they can indicate possession. If you own something, you can say, for example, I have a car, or he owns a car, rather. He owns a car. I have a dream. Have, owns are verb that indicate possession. You are the owner of something. So they don't have to be action. All right. Now, verbs can be described in different ways depending on the action or the function they perform or the tense they indicate. So we have verbs in different ways, in different forms, and some of them are on the board here. I've described this one already. Verbs can indicate action. So those verbs that can indicate action or mark action are simply referred to as action verbs. For example, work, break. These are action verbs. Then there are some verbs that serve to link or connect two items. You call those verbs linking verbs. For example, I am a teacher. Am is linking I to teacher. And linking verbs usually connect items that are similar or the same. So I is the same as teacher. So I have am connecting these two elements. Then you have auxiliary verbs. You can describe a verb as an auxiliary verb, and as the name implies, auxiliary simply means support or assist. So an auxiliary verb is that verb that supports another verb. For example, are is auxiliary verb because it's supporting playing. So here, are is an auxiliary verb supporting playing. Can is also an auxiliary verb supporting swim. So can is supporting swim. So can is an auxiliary verb. Verbs can also be described as transitive or non-transitive. A transitive verb simply is that verb that has an object. Or remember, a verb makes a sentence. So you can have a subject, verb, and an object or complement. For example, the first sentence here doesn't have an object. Remember, the object is the receiver of the action. That means the verb has to be an action verb first before it can carry or take an object. So, a transitive verb is that action verb that has object. It has a subject and then an object. For example, the boy, this is the subject, broke the verse. So the verse is the object. Now we can call broke here a transitive verb because it has an object. Am, on the other hand, is not a transitive verb because it doesn't have an object. Instead, What is here is called a complement. Have a complement. So this is not an object, this is a complement. So am is not a transitive verb because it doesn't have an object. Okay, non-transitive. Yeah, for example, this one is non-transitive because it doesn't have object. So transitive are verbs that have object, then non-transitive, just the opposite, verbs without object. Verb can also be described as finite or non-finite. Okay, this has to do with tense. A verb can indicate time. So if an action happened in the past, a verb can mark that to show that this is past, present, or future. You may have more than one verb in a sentence, but you only get one that is finite or relating with the subject in terms of number and also making reference to time. So a finite verb is simply the verb in a sentence that works with the subject. So the verb has to relate with the subject in terms of number, and then it has to make reference to time as well. For example, in this sentence, we have more than one verb, are and playing, but there is just one finite verb, which is are. So playing is not finite because playing is not relating with the subject, which is children. And playing is not indicating time either. So are is the one relating with the subject, and are is also marking time. Are is showing us that this is present, present, continuous, and then are is also telling us that the subject is plural. Because we have a plural verb, there should be a plural subject. This one is not really relating with the subject because it will not change. If the subject changes, this one will not change. The only verb that will change will be this one. For example, if we decide to put boy here, and our sentence reads this way: the ball is playing. So playing still remains. It's not changing. It's not going to change because it is not the finite verb. The finite verb is that one that relates with the subject, such that if the subject changes, the verb will also change. So a finite verb is simply that active verb that relates with the subject and also makes reference to time. And the non-finite verb is just the opposite. So this one is not finite. This is another example. I can swim. So can is the finite verb. Swim is non-finite because swim cannot relate with the subject and it cannot indicate time either. So if we want to make this pass, our sentence will read, I could swim. I could swim. Swim still remains. It's not going to change because it is non-finite. Then there are verbs that are stative. Remember, I said earlier that some verbs indicate action or activity. There are other verbs that don't mark action. Instead, they express your state or condition or possession. Those are the static verbs. So static verbs are the verbs that indicate your state. For instance, he knows the answer. He knows the answer. This is just his state, his condition. And one quality of stative verbs is that they cannot be used in a progressive form. You cannot say he knowing or he is knowing the answer. Stative verbs mostly express emotion, sense, feelings, thoughts, and all of that. Okay, then there are regular verbs, irregular verbs. This has to do with um, how verbs mark their tense or the form that a verb takes to indicate past tense. Those verbs that carry ed to indicate their past. For example, this is the past form of work. Work is the simple present, then worked is the past tense. So work, worked. And then the participial form of work is also worked. So you can call this verb work, a regular verb because the past tense, the simple past tense, and the past participle are the same. They don't change. Worked, worked. The irregular verbs are those verbs that have a different form. The past tense and the participle are formed differently. For example, we can say sing, sang, and then you say song. Excuse me, let's use this. If we have sing, sang, and song. So this is the past participle or past perfect. So the past perfect is different from the simple past tense. So you call this one irregular verb. Irregular verbs have different form when they're in the past, simple past, and then when they're in the past perfect form. So these are some of the ways you can describe a verb and then how to use verbs too in sentences or simple sentences like this. We are going to look at some of these verbs in more detail, especially the finite and non-finite verb, the auxiliary verbs, and the regular and irregular verbs. So in our next class, I'm going to be treating some of the types of verbs we have here in more detail. I hope this helps. So do well to join me in the next class. See you.